welcome to a special episode of the Third Impact Anime Podcast. This is part of a new series covering the book that's just come out by Helen McCarthy and Darren John Ashmore about the life and work of Leiji Matsumoto, and we have two of the contributors with us here today. I have Tim Eldred and I have Ed Hoff. Tim is a writer and artist who has worked on a wide array of animated series such as the Batman, Jackie Chan Adventures, Spider-Man, Avengers Assemble. If you are someone of my general age, you've probably watched at least one thing that he has done storyboards on. And he's also done comic books such as Robotech. He had his own graphic novel, Grease Monkey, that came out in 2007. And of course, he's worked on the Captain Harlock and Star Blazers, aka Yamato, comics here in the state. He also runs Cosmo DNA, which is the research for Star Blazers / Yamato information and archives. It's a huge part of the sort of Matsumoto fandom if you're, again, someone in the Anglophone world. So, Tim, glad to have you on.
Thank you. Happy to be here. I'm happy to be anywhere.
I think, God, remember when we could be places? And then Ed Hoff, he is originally from Vancouver, Canada, but he currently lives in Japan. He has organized the World Cosplay Summit since its inception in 2003 and has conducted his doctoral studies at Nagoya University on the global popularization of cosplay. He's currently a lecturer at Tokyo Dinky University, and he hosts the Macadamia Academic Conference when it's in Japan and also works on the steering committee. So, Ed, we're happy to have you on as well.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So the reason that we have both of you on today is both of you have written chapters and contributed to the Matsumoto book. Tim, your chapter is Even Better Than the Real Thing, Matsumoto's Manga. And Ed, your chapter is The Impact of Matsumoto Leiji's Universe on Anime Magazines as a Platform for Cosplay. And I'm glad to have both of you on because you actually sort of reference each other in both of your chapters, and your work has considerable overlap to the topic. So I'm going to start with Tim because you've worked on the official Star Blazers and Harlock comics. How did you get into Matsumoto's work?
I probably followed the same path as just about everybody in my generation, which started watching anime in the early to mid 80s. Star Blazers was my gateway drug. I have to call it a drug because that's what it's become, into the world of Space Battleship Yamato, and then the broad world of anime and manga that it's a part of. And I think Leiji Matsumoto was the first actual creator whose name I learned as a result of pursuing my interests, because he played such a major role in making that show what it was. He was not there at the very beginning of the production. He was a co-creator, but his contributions were all solid gold. He became the MVP very quickly because he, unlike the others, had a very long and respected history already creating visual science fiction. And it was enormously appealing to watch his concepts come to life on TV. And so, like many of us, the very next thing we explored was Captain Harlock, because it had so much of the same DNA as Yamato. And right after that would come Galaxy Express. And then in the process of digging up data on those three things, we inevitably became exposed to the entire sweep of anime and manga, all of which had some connection because it was all of the same atmosphere, the same cultural influence, and it just naturally created a conduit for everything to come flowing into our minds. And the deeper you dug, the more you found. And especially with Matsumoto's history, the thing that I observed very early on was that a Matsumoto anime looked very different from a Matsumoto manga. There was a very broad range of expression between the two, and you could spend your entire life exploring that range.
Ed, would you say that you had a sort of similar interaction with the work when you started? Was it sort of a gateway drug for you, or did you find your way to Matsumoto in a different way?
Absolutely. It's interesting hearing from Tim that gateway drug aspect of it, because it really was for me as well. Star Blazers was, I don't know, it was just something different that was on TV for me. I might be a couple years younger than Tim, and being from Canada, I encountered Star Blazers on television. I think it was 1983, 84. I was 8 or 9 years old at the time, and I just remember, sneaking downstairs 8 o'clock in the morning, Saturday morning, to watch TV and watch this new TV series about this amazing space adventure, traveling through the solar system, traveling from planet to planet with these strange blue alien enemies, and that ends. I remember suddenly the story being gone. And I didn't really understand at the time that this was a series. This wasn't like Bugs Bunny or Tom and Jerry, where you're endlessly watching the same cartoons over and over again. This was a story that had a start and a finish. And I just remember at that time sort of flipping through the channels, and I think Robotech was on as well. I believe Captain Harlock was on as well. But it was really Star Blazers that hooked me, that traveling through space aspect of it, and the story behind it. So yeah, it really was the start for me there.
One thing that strikes me whenever I speak to any anime fan of any generation is how common the story of "it's different than what I was seeing on TV" pops up. In Helen's case, when we spoke to her earlier in the year, she mentions it was just different than the comics that she was reading. But my friend Lawrence Ing mentions like, "Oh, I saw Robotech and it was so different than what we were seeing on TV." And you guys mentioned that Star Blazers was just something so different. And even now, like people who are younger than me, which is a terrifying thing to contemplate at this point, they say the thing that gets them in the anime is it was different than what they were seeing. And I feel like that element of being something that kind of comes from somewhere unknown is sort of a driving force into why people get into anime fandom and then become so passionate about it and want to learn everything and begin archiving material or developing these sort of fan communities around something.
Yeah,
They all become curators because there's a ton of information to be organized and repackaged. It all has to be pulled very carefully through the language barrier, and then we all need to come to our own understanding of what is fact and what is guesswork. And for decades, we sorted through all of that to create what we now know as anime fandom. By the way, before we drift away from Star Blazers into the bigger Matsumoto topic, I would like to digress for a moment and mention that I heard some kind of sad news today. Uh, are either of you familiar with the name Amy Howard Wilson?
I am, as of today, I saw the news as well.
Yeah, okay. We lost Amy Howard Wilson back on February 28th, and the news was made public today on Facebook. In case that name doesn't ring a bell, she was the voice of arguably the most popular character in Star Blazers, that being Nova. And she was also the first and only member of that cast to actually integrate with anime fandom. Back in the late 90s, she began appearing regularly at conventions, mainly Anime Weekend Atlanta. And she found instant family there in all of us. And she found a husband in our ranks. And only today, after spending a lot of time with her over the years, did I find this out myself. So I just want to throw out a Star Blazer salute to our dear Nova. Godspeed.
Yeah, it's I just think of the many losses that we've had during this year. It's really tough. We have to make sure that we point out that it's during the pandemic that we are recording the our discussion, and it's always tough when we lose close friends in the community or other academics as well. I have a good friend who I went to postgraduate studies with. She's a professor in Indonesia, and we did a talk on pop culture and democracy last year with her students in Indonesia, and she passed away a couple weeks ago. So my thoughts are drawn to that, and it's a tough time, but we have to. All we can do is keep moving forward and keep their memories in mind and continue their legacies and tell their stories about who they were and how great people they were.
Tim, I didn't have time to read anything other than the headline. Did it mention if the pandemic was part of the cause of her passing, or was it something else?
All that was said about it is that she went peacefully. So I'm thankful for that.
That's probably the most important thing right now.
Yeah.
So I am sorry. I am not as versed in Star Blazers or Yamato. This book has actually been, I think, as Helen has mentioned, she wanted to be a sort of a gateway for other people. And Matsumoto is sort of a blind spot in my own anime knowledge. So I feel for the people in the fandom who've lost her and her friends and her family. I saw that and I was like, wow, I'm recording this tonight, and that's not really a good thing to go in on.
Well, another interesting aspect of being a Leiji Matsumoto fan of our generation, speaking for Ed and myself, is that by its very nature, you end up sort of being a father figure, or in some cases, a grandfather figure to other fans. And you sort of have this subliminal urge to sit everybody down around a campfire and tell stories about how you first met up with Leiji, how you first encountered his work and how it affected you, and all the wonders that you little kids can now take for granted because they're so freely available to you. I'm sure Ed can also tell stories about how difficult it was to find anything back in the 80s and how deep you had to dig for it, but also, as a result, how rewarding it was to find something.
Yeah, I mean, I think I filled that space with Dungeons and Dragons. I had an Atari, I had a Pong system when I was a kid, so I was really involved in comics and lots of other geeky related topics. But bringing things back to one point we mentioned before about that realization of what Leiji Matsumoto's works were, or what anime was at the time. I didn't have any understanding at the time of what that was. It wasn't only until I got to Japan that I really had an opportunity to think back about those moments as a child and really see, okay, well, this was a product that comes from Japan. Leiji Matsumoto is this massive personality here. I didn't really realize how large a character he is until I had that perspective and that opportunity to compare them. And I think that's something that we have also as we grow and we go to conventions and we meet other people. We really realize that this is something that's a lot bigger than what we realized as youth. As kids, we just enjoyed it, purely enjoyed it for what it was, and the story was captivating and fascinating. It's only later on in life that we can really appreciate that. I think that connects with what Tim's saying about telling stories and relaying that to others as well. I think it also speaks to Star Blazers as a storyline, or Leiji Matsumoto's works in creating a world with so much connective tissue within it. So it's a pleasure to be on board the project and to be helping out in that way.
So for both of you, how did it go in working on this book? How were you approached, and what was your sort of idea of how you contribute?
Well, I've been a friend of Helen McCarthy's for many, many years. We go back to just about the same starting point in all of this. And of course, she's been keeping up with my work as I've kept up with hers. And so she knew immediately that she could call upon me to contribute a chapter to the book because I'd already translated many, many different interviews with Matsumoto for my website, Cosmo DNA. And so the tricky part was just deciding what to write about. She was mainly interested in an account of how Matsumoto fandom developed in America and how it affected us. And so I sort of started with that as a germ of an idea, um, but then quickly realized that it could be more interesting and more in depth if I explored it from my own approach as someone who interpreted his work rather than just collected it. And that came in the form of the Captain Harlock and Star Blazers comic books, where I had to absorb the actual visual material that was designed for the anime and redraw it myself, staying loyal to it, understanding what made it work, finding the structure beneath all of the individual elements, and then reproducing them in a new form for American readers. And in doing that, I sort of discovered what it was like for so many other artists in Japan to do exactly the same thing. As I said, there's a broad range between Matsumoto's manga and Matsumoto's anime, and that's because many, many more people were responsible for drawing the anime. And so his work had to be synthesized into a new form that they could reproduce. And I realized very soon in the process that examining, analyzing, and describing that synthesis was an aspect of Matsumoto's career that nobody really touched on yet. And so once I keyed in on that, I was off and running.
I find it very interesting in your chapter how you put it in the terms of frames and framing, and that Matsumoto is not, in a way, not really even a pure substance that we can sort of study because he worked with so many assistants, and his designs were sort of tweaked by so many different character designers specifically to make them translatable to television, and then those designs are sort of taken by a broader culture. I think you mentioned in your chapter also how a Harlock-esque character ends up in a Star Wars comic in America, and in a way that is another frame. It is the sort of regurgitation of a design of a design of a design, that there is really no true Matsumoto because it just becomes part of the cultural ether.
Right. It's a concept. It's a body of work, but it needs an originator, and everything that comes out of that body of work can be traced back to that original genetic pattern that only he could have created. Uh, so part of the process of being a Matsumoto fan is teasing out what he actually drew from what was interpreted. His pure creation as opposed to a version of his creation. Um, but I think it's fascinating. I can't think of any other artist on earth who has been the progenitor of a process like that.
Yeah, your section on discussing Leiji Matsumoto's work is one thing that I found really interesting was that Star Wars connection. I believe Darren also mentioned, or it's mentioned again in the book, but it's a fascinating part of things. One thing that I wanted to ask was you discuss anime and manga in great depth, and the framing of the manga and the unique aspects that Leiji Matsumoto brings out with the framing of his manga. It shows a lot of experience in that, and I was wondering if you could touch on that and how Leiji Matsumoto's layout of the manga was different from others during that time.
You're talking about things like page composition?
Yeah, and the layout and the look of the images and the use of black and white.
Mm-hmm. Well, every artist approaches that a little bit differently. Jack Kirby had his methods. Will Eisner had his methods. Kazuhiro Otomo has his methods, to flip it over to the Japan side. Leiji Matsumoto has his. The comic book and manga toolkit is massive, and everybody uses tools in their own way. One of the things I noticed early on with a Matsumoto manga is it became very common for him to construct a page with horizontal panels running from top to bottom. So each one was kind of a strip. And I think in some cases, when you're creating manga very quickly, you fall back on just a handful of page layout styles. I know I do. There's some that I just naturally gravitate toward. And if you use them often enough, you learn how to manipulate them for specific effects. The act of composing a comic book page is like creating a mural, and the job is to direct the eye of the reader in specific directions at a specific pace. And so where you choose to place an image and how you choose a shape for a frame and where you position a word balloon in relation to another word balloon is all part of that craft. And I think one of the most unique parts of Leiji Matsumoto's approach to that craft was his use of those horizontal strips of panels. Sometimes they would be a solid white background, sometimes a solid black background. Often the goal was to center a character and put dialogue on either side. He just found many ways of using that composition. And I don't know that I can go any deeper than that in describing it, but it's just something that was unique to him and that stood out to me compared to the works of others. There's also a difficult translation when manga travels horizontally and vertically, because text is read in both directions in Japanese. I'm sure, Ed, you know this far better than I do. So there are additional tricks that we don't have to do in American comics that prevent a reader in Japan from accidentally reading things vertically. There are visible breaks and gaps and bars that are built into a page layout that become another part of that toolkit. It's very fascinating.
Yeah, very interesting. The drawing of the eye, or the drawing of the beholder through the mangas is something that I encounter with through manga studies in academic presentations, etc. My own studies are more cultural studies, anthropological studies of people and the things that we do as cultures in societies. But one thing that I've always found fascinating with manga is the analysis of the simple frame. I mean, we say it's simple, but there's so much value or meaning put into that in moving the eye across the page in ways that maybe we don't even think about. It's a subconscious sort of thing, almost like in my fine arts class in university, with images by Picasso or Michelangelo, and the triangulation of the figure within the classic image, or the drawing of the viewer towards light or different parts of a painting. In the same way, manga will draw your eyes across. It's interesting that you mentioned the difference between Japanese and English as well, because obviously that becomes difficult in translation, where the artist is trying to pull your eyes one direction, but you're going to be reading in a different direction, then you're going to have a conflict in that sense. So how to overcome that as a translator? Maybe Zach Davison and his work in translation might be able to answer that better. But it's very interesting with that manga aspect of things.
Yeah, and another thing that I noticed specifically about Matsumoto manga is there's a lot of empty space. And there are very specific practical reasons for that. One of which is that if you are generating a lot of manga very quickly, you can ensure that you meet your deadline by drawing fewer actual panels. So if he had to crank out 25 pages a week, obviously he didn't want to test himself with having to fill every square inch with detail. And so it became more practical sometimes to leave a big open area in a page composition, or to fill up an entire page with one image, which was something he did a lot. Much more so than you can do in an American comic, because it's naturally expected that you're going to cram as much story and art into one of those as possible. And that's just driven by economics. Manga has much greater readership per capita. And so once you have a steady manga gig, you're less likely to lose it than you are an American comic book gig. So you can loosen it up a little bit. You're not required to jam in as much information as you can just for the sake of trying to sell the next book. And so when you have the option of slowing down your pace and opening up your compositions, it can become much more artistic and much more meditative. And I think that's something he's always been particularly good at.
I know in your chapter you also mentioned that the way he uses line, that Matsumoto loves to use incomplete, unconnected line to sort of suggest images and ideas, and use negative space and the spared use of line to kind of give the impression of something and allow this sort of relationship between him as the artist and you as the reader and the interpreter to kind of meet in the middle and form your own imaginary, your sort of vision of what his world looks like halfway with him.
Yeah, I think part of the reason techniques like that develop is because when you draw your entire life, you want to keep it interesting. You want to evolve. You want to find new shortcuts and new paths and new means of expression. So if you look at a Matsumoto manga from the early 60s, for example, you don't see that at all. Back in those days, his standards were Osamu Tezuka and Walt Disney. And he wanted to be an animator more than he wanted to be a manga artist. And so he drew like an animator. And characters were fully rounded and fully closed out. And it would have been ironically much easier to interpret had those manga gone to anime, but it was too early for that. But by the time he gets to the 70s, he's worked through all of that, and he wants to express himself differently, and he wants to find new ways to render his characters. And one of those ways was to develop this what I call a broken brush technique, where you trace a line all around the outline of a character, but that line is not fully closed. It's not fully connected. It has specific breaks in it. And perfecting that technique meant deciding for himself, where is it appropriate to break a line? And if I leave this part out, am I providing enough information for a reader to connect it emotionally or subliminally? And in that way, it becomes a way of making the reader part of the process of interpreting the art. And it becomes even more personal.
Ed, your chapter focuses on anime magazines in Japan specifically, and even more specifically on cosplay. The sort of relationship that anime fandoms across countries have with cosplay is always something that feels like it's ebbing and flowing and shifting and changing. And I find the way you track those changes, specifically by highlighting fans of Matsumoto's who will cosplay his characters. How did you go into developing this chapter?
Well, initially, I should say that I'm much junior to Tim, and to be on board with Helen McCarthy and Darren Ashmore, it's a great honor. Just hearing Tim talk about many years of his activities, looking at his web page here, he has the Tim DB, which documents his history from birth in 1965 onwards, and everything that he's been involved in is
Oh, you're looking at my archival site. Yeah, that's a newer one. It's at timeldred.com if anybody would like to check it out.
So it's an honor in that way. And when it was Darren Ashmore who I think in 2017 I went to a conference at his university, Yamanashi Gakuin University. I believe I met Helen for the first time there, although of course I've heard of her name for so many years before that. And I was invited on board to the project to write one of the chapters at that time, or it was after that, but it was through that meeting. And yeah, I was thinking, well, what can I bring to the table? How can I fill out the story of Leiji Matsumoto, or provide an essay about him? And I went down to the Yoshihiro Yonezawa Memorial Library, which is Yoshihiro Yonezawa was the creator of Comic Market, one of the oldest sort of cons, or it's a doujinshi, it's a fanzine convention in Japan, world famous. And he was the first CEO. Passed away unfortunately a few years back, but there is a memorial library to him through Meiji University, and they have a vast collection of manga and they've got doujinshi, fanzines, and they also have a vast collection of anime magazines. And I went down there and started going through those, and really found that through that, and also in discussions with Esayu Shijima, who I do mention in my article. He's one of the first cosplay organizers for Comic Market. That these anime magazines really were not just kind of the first iterations of community-based interaction between fans within Japan, but also a place where Leiji Matsumoto's works and other works were really introduced to a wider audience. I think of when I was young, with Dungeons and Dragons, we had there's the Dragon magazine, which was kind of the same sort of thing. There's young, me in elementary school, flipping through this magazine, looking at these Dragon Con in Georgia, this faraway place, 4,000 kilometers, 3,000 miles away, which I'm never going to get to go at 12 years old, or Minnesota, and these great characters, Gary Gygax. I just imagine the same sort of thing with anime magazines within Japan, kind of bringing youth together and exposing people to otaku culture, or as Tim mentions in his section, the maniac culture. Before there was the word otaku, it was the word maniac, I guess. But sort of exposing youth to that, and also exposing youth to costuming, cosplay, seeing images of other young people dressing up as characters. I mean, we are animals in so many ways. We are akin to monkeys. Monkey see, monkey do. When we see someone doing something that looks like a lot of fun, hey, let's give it a try. Oh, that anime looks really interesting. I want to see that. When we see that and we have that ability to tangibly visualize something or touch something in that way, it moves us and inspires us, and really it's the growth of community in that way. In my chapter, I also look at the growth of magazines in Japan and the inspiration from the United States post World War II in the 1960s and 1970s, and the growth of magazines like there's Takarajima, there's Bikkuri House, these kind of cultural magazines that started to grow in the U.S. Not just like Time magazine talking about news or cultural issues, but pop culture, youth culture, subculture. The hippie movement in California. I know there's one big magazine on the West Coast that was very influential. The name's not coming to me right now, but that was brought to Japan, and there was a lot of magazines that came out from that. And for anime and manga, at the time, there was, in the mid 70s, there was magazines such as Out, or Animec, or later on Fan Road and Animage that developed, and the first iteration of those anime magazines was brought out by industry, and they were sort of promoting their own product. But it was Fan Road and Animage that really brought out the fan community. Had letters that were being sent in, and fans talking to each other saying, oh, I participated in this event. We had a lot of fun. This is our club. If you're interested in joining our club, send us a message here. So it's really these, anime magazines that was the first beginnings of this growth of community. Nowadays, we have the internet, and there's so many forums and different groups that we can communicate with instantaneously. But 30, 40 years ago, it really was these magazines that started bringing community together, started bringing otaku together, cosplayers as well. And it was really through Leiji Matsumoto's work, which created the first boom of costuming, cosplay in Japan. And I went through a lot of the magazines, and I found some really great photos and included them in the chapter. Just youth having fun, 15-year-olds dressed up as the characters from Star Blazers and reenacting different scenes, and that it's all black and white, and it's all there. So that really was what brought things together for my own chapter there.
When you mentioned at the start of the chapter the other magazines that were popular, and sort of you group them into cultural magazines, subcultural magazines, and then when you go into talking about early anime magazines and how some of them really do kind of spring from these genre film science fiction magazines, I really was thinking about how there has been a lot of discussion lately about things like Fangoria and Famous Monsters of Filmland in America and England and Canada and basically the Anglophone world, how they sort of help form these nascent youth identities of like sort of proto geek, but the kids who are into monsters and robots and stuff. And I couldn't help but think about that same thing when reading your chapter about how these are sort of it is the proto even Maniac. It's before even that is these early ideas of what does it mean to be into these things, and these things getting their own magazine, and Matsumoto work being in the same pages as something that's going to be talking about Forbidden Planet, and developing these ideas of who you are through a publication, but also the sort of in-group you mentioned, the people posting these photos are other people like you, and they're not coming directly from a publishing house, which gives it this sort of colleague feel that you're reading from people like you, as opposed to what a fashion magazine is, not someone like you, but someone who you want to be like.
It really was that change from just straight promotional magazines into fan community magazines, but also it's very interesting to trace that development through the 70s of kind of pop culture magazines into science fiction and kind of introducing the world of science fiction movies and the like, and then the introduction of anime, the comparison of anime to science fiction. The Out magazine is one of the earliest geek related publications. The first year or two is strictly science fiction, and then it starts introducing anime, and then it starts comparing, and then it kind of develops from there, and then it becomes primarily anime. So there's a kind of a shift there. Another interesting aspect is the look or the perspective on Western movies such as Star Wars from Japan, and the impact that it had on Japan. We discussed earlier that influence of Star Blazers on Star Wars. I think there was a conversation there or communication there. Star Wars was very influential on Japan as well, and to see that perspective on things, or E.T. and the extraterrestrial, the shonen perspective, the beautiful boy perspective of the main character in E.T. and the extraterrestrial. I never really looked at the main character in E.T. as such a beautiful boy, but from the Japanese eye, the Japanese perspective, and relating that to popular manga and anime at the time, see the characters in a different way, and you really see that in the anime magazines of the time. So it's really interesting comparing that to my own upbringing and what I saw through Western culture, again through Japanese culture in the anime magazines.
Whenever I talk to people, again, who are slightly younger than me, and I hate to even contemplate that, there seems to be this idea that Japan is this impenetrable wall, that nothing that is made in other countries ever reaches Japan. And whenever they find out that people in Japan know who Batman is, or they watch the movies, I think we are so used in the West to this idea of we are the producers of media and anything else is some fluke, that we don't really think of things going the other way. I actually showed two of my friends Phantom of the Paradise a few days ago, which is one of my favorite movies, and I told them, it's like, do you know the number of anime and manga that has looked at Winslow Leach's mask and then copied it over and over and over because it was such a cult hit in Japan? And people are always, I think, weirdly shocked that, whenever people show the Daikon opening, that, Darth Vader and the Justice League and all these other characters pop up alongside Godzilla and King Ghidorah, and that weird six-eyed alien cat from Ogon Bot that I always forget the name of. There is this sort of conversations between cultures and these sort of screens that we look at each other's media through.
Yeah, we are very narcissistic beings. We are very childish in that way. As a child, we sort of grow up and we think that the world around us is created for us. It's all for us. We are the prince, the princess in the middle of this world. And then we grow up and we realize that that's not the truth, but that still remains with us. The fact that we are the center of our story, and you find that everywhere. It's China, Chugoku, the Chinese characters that are used in the country's name, the central country. It begins with the South and it expands to the nation state as that country being the center of the world. And that's even more so when you have the economic power or the clout that's behind that. And that very much is, I think it plays to a lot of what we're discussing here. I did have a question for Tim, bringing things back to the book discussion and anime magazines. I noticed that Tim, on your site, you have a lot of images that technical images of mecha and of different ships from Star Blazers, etc. You must have sourced them from anime magazines themselves. I wanted to ask you, where do you source your material that you use on the website particularly for mecha?
Well, I've got a very large book collection, of course. Any time I found a Yamato book, I snapped it right up. And over time, I built up what is a pretty big library of maybe a couple hundred or more. And there was a point where I was working for Voyager Entertainment to create the DVD series for Star Blazers, moving it from VHS to DVD. And because it had been around for such a long time, I wanted to give it some added value. And so when I created extra features for it, I poured through all of the best sources to scan and clean up that artwork and create art galleries that had never been published in English before. And so that's one source, printed books. There's a lot of stuff online. Every month, I publish a report on what's happening in the Yamato world. And part of that involves collecting the fan art that I see online and turning it into a gallery, fully credited, of course. I want all of those artists to get the benefit of their work. And so between online and print sources, I have access to just about anything. But of course, that library is constantly growing. So it's a big job to keep on top of it. Stepping backward for a second, I would like to recommend that in addition to our Leiji Matsumoto book, everybody please avail yourself of another book called Pure Invention by Matt Alt. It's a very eye-opening history about pop culture in Japan and how it influenced the world in ways that you don't even guess at until you read how Matt lays out a topic. He'll pick something like karaoke and give you the entire history of it, and or social media. Many of the things that we now take for granted originated in Japan without us even knowing it. And Matt does an amazing job of capturing it all in print. So, Pure Invention by Matt Alt. If you're an anime fan, you absolutely must read that book. You'll enjoy every minute of it.
I had it on my birthday list. A friend got it for my birthday, and I read it in basically one or two sittings. It is a wonderful book, and if you know me in person, and we are both anime fans, you know I've probably said, "Have you read Pure Invention yet? Have you? You have to. I'll let you borrow my copy." It is a
Yeah.
wonderful book.
And one of the things you take away from that book is the fact that Japan's youth has always been a culture of early adopters, going all the way back to the 60s. The post-war generation had a new world to live in. Their world had literally been rebuilt from the ground up. And so newness was very desirable. And so when a new American film arrived in Japan, everybody went to see it. And that led to a huge American footprint in terms of pop culture, which they then adopted and synthesized and reinterpreted using their own viewpoint and their own psychology into whole new things. So whereas it's true you can scan a lot of anime from the 70s and 80s and find American influences in it, they're very quick to turn that around. And now we are using influences that we've seen originate on their side. And so it's a constant cultural conversation that goes back and forth across the ocean. It's very rich, it's very invigorating, and it can lead to a lifetime of study.
Yeah, Matt Alt's work is amazing. I had him speak at the first Macadamia conference that we held in Japan, and he is just a vast source of knowledge on cultural aspects of Japan. He also has a program on an NHK Japanology Plus, and he has a lot of material out there. Pure Invention. That's one that I'll have to add to my list for sure.
I guess wrapping up, I want to ask, you know, Leiji Matsumoto was born over 80 years ago, and we are still, I do not think, even if you are someone who has never even heard of his work, but you're an anime fan, you have been exposed to the ripples that have sort of come out of all of the things he's done. I can't think of, many series that do not either reference him directly or kind of owe something to his work. So where do you think Matsumoto going to, I mean, he's still with us, but where do you see his work going in the future? Where do you see his legacy, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, after he's gone? Where do you see it going from there?
Well, that transition has already begun on the manga side, because within the last 5 years, for the first time, other artists have begun to interpret his characters directly under his supervision. There have been Harlock manga and Galaxy Express manga and Gun Frontier manga, all written and drawn by new artists. And he's essentially passing the baton that way. He doesn't draw nearly as much as he used to. And when he does, his style, it has evolved even further into this sort of Picasso-esque realm of lines that don't connect, and figures that don't look the same as they used to. And so I think as he becomes more and more advanced in years, his the appeal of his art becomes more and more narrow, but the interpretations of his art are becoming more and more exciting. Just like it did when he created the foundation for anime. That foundation has now moved into manga and is being interpreted in new and interesting ways that can still be directly traced back to him. There's an entire generation of artists that he inspired who have become anime and manga professionals, and you can see echoes of his work in their work. They're very happy to proclaim where they got their inspiration and demonstrate how it affects their work, and how they interpret it in different and unique ways. I don't know that we're going to see any more Matsumoto anime, because it's been a while since something new came out. And in recent years, especially within the last decade, he's attempted to launch several anime projects that were not picked up for one reason or another. So if we see new Matsumoto anime, it's probably going to be in the form of a loving, loyal adaptation of something older. There's a giant vault of stories that have never been adapted that way, and that could happen. The same way Osamu Tezuka stories occasionally pop up in a new animated form. And we're certainly still seeing Cyborg 009 anime year after year. And so this is not beyond the realm of possibility. There's definitely a precedent for it. I think that the biggest obstacle for American readers is that so little of his manga has been translated. We've gotten the major stuff, Yamato, Harlock, and Galaxy Express, but there's so much more beyond that that we haven't seen, that we really need to appreciate the depth of what he's created over his lifetime. There is so much that I think it could go on for decades before we run out.
Yeah, he's really a kind of a legendary figure, like Osamu Tezuka in that way, as one of the anime greats in Japan, and that's the position legacy that he'll maintain down the road. Like Tim said, there's repeated iterations of his work that is coming out, and that's one thing that I actually wanted to ask Tim while we have the opportunity is What are your thoughts on the Space Odyssey, Space Battleship Yamato 2199 and Space Battleship Yamato 2202?
Mhm.
Which were
Well, of course, I love them both
Mhm.
to the marrow of my bones. Those are amazing. I love the original and I love the remakes for different reasons. They were done by people who grew up on the original, and so they're very fiercely loyal to the spirit. However, there's a whole nother topic that could fill a book of its own about Matsumoto's relationship to Yamato and how it evolved over the. There was an attempt in the late '90s for him to take control of the property, which was met with a lot of resistance because it had been divided up between several different licensors by that time. And so ultimately, he lost that bid. And as a result of that legal conflict, a lot of his specific contributions to the original Yamato were either filtered out or redesigned in the remakes. Um, but it's undeniable that his influence is still there. It's built into the DNA. You can't remove it. Um, but it was compromised by the directive that they could not put anything into the remake that could be considered actionable, that would reignite one lawsuit or another. It took them so many years to get everybody to nod their heads in unison and allow it to be made that the last thing they wanted to do was endanger that goodwill. And so that's where it stands. For some people, that's a deal breaker. They cannot look at a Yamato that didn't involve Matsumoto, and I understand that. But it has so much more to offer. I think it's myopic to stop there.
Yeah, it's I should say that the last time that Tim and I actually met was at a viewing of it was a Space Battleship Yamato 2199. I think it was the last four episodes at a movie theater. I mean, it's been 7 years now, but yeah, it was a pleasure to be able to attend a viewing with you at that time.
That would have been in August of 2013. The finale of 2199 left the theaters just as the CG Captain Harlock movie was about to open. And so I timed a week in Japan to see both.
That's great. I guess it's kind of tough during these pandemic times. I did want to ask, how often do you get to Japan? Is it usually a once in a year visit, or?
Well, I like to go once a year. I usually tie it into some Yamato event and then find other things to do while I'm there. But of course, it's been a little while since we've had a Yamato event. The last one was a concert that took place in October of 2019. So I definitely went to that. And that was a great trip. It was actually the second time I had gone that year. Uh, but of course, shortly after that, travel was restricted, and it still is right now, to my knowledge. But the next series is set to begin sometime this year. It's going to be called Yamato 2205.
Right.
They have not announced a release date yet, but I'm really hoping that when they do, it'll land inside a window where we can travel again.
Yeah.
And I
So the
definitely
story,
would like to be there for it.
yeah, continues. It keeps moving forward. Just as we were discussing these constant ripple effects and the reiterations of his stories. 2205 is on the horizon now. From what I've seen, is that going to be a movie, or is it going to be an anime series? Have you heard anything about that at all?
That particular factoid is still maddeningly vague. Um, I am still calling it a series because when they refer to the writer, they give him the credit of series writer. If
Okay.
it was a feature film, I think they would have told us by now, because it's been in production for well over a year. And so, the time has passed for them to to quit being vague and let us know exactly what they're doing. I expect it's going to be another series because they've done really well with that production model. And so I think they would be foolish not to go that way, but we'll see. Things change.
It's quite obvious that that love continues. That you know, we're not we don't want to let it go. You know, the stories, the world that's out there is so much a part of us, and it's for so many people. You know, going to a theater and watching the episodes together with others is an amazing thing. You know, it's a mostly predominantly men in their late 30s, 40s, and early 50s in Japan. You look around and you see people of your own generation who are around there. That the story is so meaningful to so many people. It's great to be able to see that and enjoy that and remember and reminisce on your own childhood and how influential the stories were for to yourself. So,
yeah, people our age are still the core audience even after all this time.
Yeah. That being said, it's very important to mention that I know that we're kind of wrapping things up here, but there's so much more to the book that we haven't mentioned. You know, the cosplay stories from Onidine Montoya and Matthew Montoya. I think also Jonathan Tarbox's discussion on the role of the cockpit is a fascinating look at you know, Leiji Matsumoto and the connection with his father, who was in the Japanese military, and the influences on him, and also Stephanie Thomas's work of the female within the stories of Leiji Matsumoto and Matsumoto's world. In my chapter, I also interview Mariko Tani, who has in the 1990s has looked at the role of women in science fiction in Japan, and it's really a very interesting and very important perspective to see that role of the dynamic between male and female within Leiji Matsumoto's story. So, I mean, there's so much more to discuss. It's I think in the future with the podcast, if you're going to be talking to Helen and Darren, there will be a lot more to discuss, I believe.
Right. So far, we have Helen and Darren and Stephanie, and hopefully, Zach, we have a lot of people. We have most, I think, of the contributors. They will be taking some time out to do interviews like that with us too. So hopefully, with everybody on board, we will get people to buy the book. I will make sure there are links to purchasing the book and links to Tim and Ed's sites where you can find their research and information and their work. And I will also make sure that we have links to all of the Matsumoto stuff that is currently available legally in English, so you can buy the manga collections from Seven Seas. I know that several versions of Matsumoto's anime are on Tubi, which is actually a free legal service to watch a lot of old shows. If you're like me, you love things that are free because I'm a grad student and very cheap. So we'll make sure that you have links to places you can watch Matsumoto anime, even if you feel like you can't afford the sets. But we'll have a link to the Right Stuff site where they have the discotheque sets, which are really, really nice. I have a friend who has some of those, and they are really well put together. So you will not be wanting for Leiji Matsumoto if you keep listening to us for a while.
Yeah, if I could, I'd like to throw in a couple of plugs at the end here.
Sure, go ahead.
First is the site that has come up already a couple of times, Cosmo DNA. The URL is ourStarblazers.com, and it's the largest website in the world devoted to Star Blazers and Space Battleship Yamato. I update it on the 15th of every month, and there are tons and tons of Leiji Matsumoto interviews in there, and I explore just about every aspect of that franchise you can imagine. My other website is timeldred.com. The name is Art Vault, and it's an archival site that covers my entire artistic career, going all the way back to when I was 12 years old and had just seen Star Wars and the Shogun Warriors for the first time, and how they set the path of my life. And there's an anime section in there as well. My next update is coming on April 1st, and it's going to include a complete rundown of all of the Leiji Matsumoto books in my library, which are something between 80 and 90 different titles.
Yeah, the images of your library is amazing. It's virtually a wall of art books. It looks like you have a lot of great material there.
Yeah, well, I like to head to work in an inspirational art space. And one of the most inspirational moments of my life was the first time I stepped into a mandara. And so from that moment on, I thought, I want my office to look like this.
For myself, I don't have as extensive an online presence as Tim, for sure, but you can get in touch with me through Twitter. My handle is Morphology, with the first O being a 0, and my webpage, which is pretty much it's a CV, www.edmundhoff.com, edmundhoff.com.
All right. Well, I want to thank both Ed and Tim for being on with us. And like I said, we will have more interviews coming up. But thank you both. The book is wonderful. I finished it a few weeks ago, and I'm really excited to see what people think about it when more and more people get their hands